You're listening to the Call Kent podcast, where Kent C. Dodds answers questions and gives insights to software engineers like you. Now, let's hear the call.
Hi Kent, my name is Prashant. I wanted to understand what is the best way to pass data or state across components in RemixJS. So today, if I was using plain React, I would use either the context API or even global variables sometimes to keep track of just the state of the application. But Remix being server-side rendered, how does it change? What are the best practices for this kind of stuff?
And that was the call. Here's what Kent had to say.
Hey, Prashant, thank you so much for the question. So in the world of modern web frameworks that we have today, particular Remix, we don't really need to reach for context very much. In fact, I don't think that I've reached for context in quite some time as far as application state goes. So the kind of things that you're talking about, like global variables, application-wide variables for the app, because Remix manages all of my data stuff, and that's primarily lots of the state that I'm working with anyway. It's all ultimately derived from the URL. There are certainly some local pieces of state, like whether or not a modal is open, or this app I'm using right now to record my response to you. I've got the current recording that is in the browser and the waveform and stuff like that. Like, that's all local stuff. The rest of the application doesn't need to know this state, and so that stuff is pretty easy. I might use context for like the compound components pattern, but even that is like pretty straightforward, and it's not what you're talking about. And since you mentioned Remix, of course, we've got a really great solution for this, and that is, okay, so I guess I should also mention, because we have Remix, we don't really need to have context most of the time for like our data and stuff. But occasionally you do need to communicate across the parent to child routes and stuff like that. And for those things, you do use context, but you may not be able or may not need to use the context API from React. And you could instead use the context prop on the outlet component. So when you're in a parent component and you want to decide where to put the child components, you render this outlet component, and you can pass a prop called context. And then in those child component, and you can pass whatever you want to that. And then inside of those child components, you have this hook that you can use called use outlet context that will give you the value that is in the closest parent, just like as you would expect context to work. And so this works, exactly the way that you would expect. You don't have to make your context. What I would recommend doing if you needed to do something like this is have the parent route that's rendering the context value. Also, in that same module, you should have a function that is use such and such route context and export that, and then the child can import that from the parent, so that you don't have to worry about typings or anything like that. You just say, if you're a child of mine, this is the type of the thing that I stick in there, and so that would make it pretty easy to use, I think. But like I said, I don't really run into this need very often. I do this in a couple of places on my own personal website, and if my personal website is kind of something that has evolved as Remix has evolved, and so there are some things that I wouldn't recommend you doing that my website does. That said, this is maybe one thing that would make sense, that I would still do it this way, and that is when you go to the workshops page, I don't have a ton of workshops, and so I actually load all of the data for all of the workshops on that workshops route, and then the child route for the specific workshop, I I need all of the data for that specific workshop, and as well as like any recommended workshops and stuff. So all of the data is loaded in the parent for the /workshops, and then I stick that into that workshops array into context, and then all of the children where I have /workshops /slug. That child route is going to reach into context to grab that the data for that particular workshop. That works out really well, and that would be one case where using context would be handy. It's just a little optimization so that those child routes don't have to load the workshop data again, because we already loaded it in the parent route anyway. So I would 100% use outlet context and the outlet context prop. If I were building that today. I don't believe that's the way that it's implemented right now, just because when I was building that page, this feature did not exist. So hopefully that helps answer your questions. I'll add links to the docs that you might find useful. Surprisingly, they're in the React Router docs. This is one of those situations where I guess they're not sure where it should go in the documentation, because it is definitely applicable to Remix, but it applies just as much to React Router as well. So I'll link you to the docs, and I hope that helps, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for the question. See ya.
This has been the Call Kent podcast. Learn more about Kent at kentcdodds.com and get your own questions answered at kentcdodds.com/calls.